This program is brought to you by realestate.com.au. Keep moving with Australia's #1 address in property.
Thanks for being with us here on Business Now. Well, let's take you around the nation to check out the weekend housing markets. And look, across Australia, REA Group says there were just 808 auctions. Sometimes you get that in one city. The clearance rate, 54%. In Sydney, there were just 326 auctions and barely 52.5% of those were sold. Melbourne, not much better, 249 auctions, almost two-thirds were sold there. In Brisbane, 51 auctions, around a third of those actually went through. Even Adelaide's quiet, 33 auctions, around 57% of those were sold. And then also in Canberra, 16 auctions, and just only 10 of those also were sold. So let's bring in here Angus Moore, Senior Economist with REA Group. Angus, we kind of know that rate cuts are coming, but it seems kind of a bit odd that housing markets aren't responding a bit more vigorously.
Yeah, we obviously expect a couple big impacts from interest rates being cut in housing markets. The first is on home prices. Obviously, as rates fall, mortgage rates fall as well. That boosts borrowing capacities and therefore what people are prepared to pay, and that tends to see home prices increase. Now, we are seeing that to some extent in Sydney and Melbourne, particularly Melbourne, where home prices have been growing this year in contrast to what we've been seeing for the past few years. But it'd be fair to say price growth hasn't been particularly quick so far this year. The other big effect we'd expect to see outside of home prices is in the new builds market. Housing construction is particularly interest rate sensitive, and there too, things are still fairly sluggish, though they have picked up from where they were a couple years ago, though it is still early days given that we've only recently started to see interest rates falling.
So is there any sense that maybe vendor or sellers could just be holding off a little, also knowing that interest rate cuts are coming, and so you're not seeing the volumes of properties hitting the market now that you might normally expect at this time of the year?
Yeah, obviously it's been a quiet couple of weeks for home sales and for auctions, given the sort of extended long weekend and potentially 10-day long weekend that some people enjoyed. That's obviously chilled auction market activity. With the election coming up, that will also probably tend to slow things as well. We are heading into a typically quieter part of the year in general for housing markets. Things tend to quiet off post-Easter. But if we're looking in the pre-Easter period, over the first few months of the year, it was actually reasonably solid in terms of the activity, particularly in Sydney and Melbourne. Number of new properties hitting market, auction volumes were still pretty high, but things are starting to quiet off now. We may start to see that pick up again as we see more rate cuts this year. And given that we're now expecting to see quite a few rate cuts this year, given changes globally, that could start to see a bit of a change in housing markets.
And it's not just rate cuts, but it's both sides of politics right now, giving an indication they want to stimulate the housing market. So you've got that also coming potentially after the election.
Yeah, obviously, we'll have to wait and see in terms of who wins and where those policies shake out. But we have seen announcements that would boost demand, particularly among first-home buyers. Housing affordability has obviously been a very hot issue going into this election, given the challenging state of housing and rental affordability, for that matter, that we've seen over the past few years. So it's unsurprising that we've seen a number of measures announced to help that. In terms of the impact of those measures, we'll kind of have to wait and see how they get implemented. But you would expect that more demand from first-home buyers, who, though a small part of the market, are still some of the market, would put a bit more pressure on home prices.
And so have you tried to weigh up which of the two political sides would actually provide more stimulus to that housing market and to first-home buyers?
It's probably hard to say, to be honest, but both are certainly pointing in the same direction in terms of stimulating demand from first-home buyers. From Labor, that's coming through the expansion to the Help to Buy scheme, which allows essentially borrowing at a 5% deposit without having to take out LMI. And from the Coalition, it would be subsidising essentially the interest cost of mortgages. Both are going to boost demand from first-home buyers. In terms of the quantum of that boost, it is a bit hard to say, but it is certainly going to have some impact on prices in that sort of first-home buyer part of the market, which is going to tend to be around the more affordable homes, potentially on the outskirts in some cases where there are more affordable dwellings.
I'll tell you what, Angus Moore, always good to have you on the program, and many thanks for your time today.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me, Ross.